recently came across a series of videos on YouTube of survivors who worked in the World Trade Center on 9/11 sharing their stories. Some of us in this room do not remember that date, but many of us do. And the one story in that series of videos that stood out to me was the story of Ron DeFrancesco. Ron grew up near Toronto, Canada, and he moved to New York City with his wife in the year 2000. He was a money market broker working in the South Tower of the World Trade Center, the second tower that was hit. And he always got to work very early in the morning because of the time zones that existed all across the world, and his work. He always needed to get there early to connect with others across the world. And so he had been settled for the day when they heard a loud explosion in the North Tower, and he and his coworkers looked out the window to see a horrific scene. And then they heard that it was a light aircraft that had gone off course, but Building 2, which they were in, was secure, and so they were instructed to go back to their seats, to their desks. And then it wasn't long after that a friend from Canada called him on the phone and yelled at him to get out of the building that he was in. And as he left the trading room floor with his friend, another colleague that he took with him, the second plane hit. The plane hit from floor 78 to 85, and he was on floor 84. And the right wing of the plane went right through the trading room just after he left it. So after trying to find an escape on the stairs, but that not working, the smoke was getting thick, and so people started to lie on the ground to try to breathe more, and he said that people started to fall asleep because of how thick the smoke was. But then he heard a voice, a calm voice, calling him, "Come this way." And so he followed that voice, and he got up and went toward the fire, and he pushed through a wall that revealed a staircase down below. So he ran down 3 flights of stairs that were filled with fire, but then he kept running until he got outside. And soon after he got outside, the tower collapsed, and he got hit in the head. And the next thing he remembered, he was waking up in the hospital 3 days later. Quite a story. He had 4 children at the time who were ages 3 to 10, and he shared his story that for a couple years after 9/11, he was just a blank slate. He didn't pay attention to his children. He said he just existed, and he shared that his wife took the brunt of that all. She kept things going in their home. And once he was back to work full-time in the spring of 2002, his children would start to worry every day if their dad was going to come home. And so they decided to move back to Canada in the summer of 2002. And he is said to be one of the last to get out of the building alive. He said 61 of his colleagues didn't make it, and so he lives with survivor's guilt because of that. Well, for the past month, we have been talking about the steps that you take to come back from a fall or a disruption in life. Sometimes we categorize our lives as before or after certain events take place, right? We've talked so far about how in the steps of coming back after a fall, we fall, and then we come to ourselves where we have a paradigm shift. And then it's important to find a guide to walk with you as you find your way back. We talked about that 2 weeks ago, the last time I was here with you. Now, whether the fall was our fault or not, or the fault of someone else, at this point we face a question. Will this fall define me, or will it motivate me to turn my life around? Sometimes I think we get stuck before we make a change. Like Ron, even if the fall isn't as traumatic as his, we can feel stuck. We feel ourselves going through the motions, not certain how to move forward, or even sure if we want to move forward because of the fear that might be on the other side. And then there's other times where we might feel stuck because we've tried to move forward and to make progress, but we've failed, so we just give up. And then we get into what leadership author Michael Hyatt calls a cynicism cycle. Some of us know some cynics in our life, right? Cynicism is that self-protective behavior that keeps us from getting hurt or disappointed. And so as you see on this graph on your screen, it really is never ending. You might be disappointed because of a failed attempt that you made to move forward, and that leads to frustration, which then can lead to anger and sadness and depression, and then finally cynicism. A cynic doesn't see any hope and only continues to spiral. I wonder if you've ever been in a spiral like that. If not, you've probably witnessed someone who is in that cycle. We've been using the story of the prodigal son in this series as our guide, and it gives us a good template to consider in moving out of cynicism and into a comeback. And so I'm going to read the story from the beginning, as we've been doing every week. I hope you're not too tired of it yet. But then I'll stop right at the beginning of verse 20 that comes to our next point in the story. So I invite you to follow along on the screens. Then Jesus said, "There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, 'Father, give me the share of the property that will belong to me.' So he divided his property between them. A few days later, the younger son gathered all he had and traveled to a distant country, and there he squandered his property in dissolute living. When he had spent everything, a severe famine took place throughout that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed the pigs. He would gladly have filled himself with the pods that the pigs were eating, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, 'How many of my father's hired hands have bread enough and to spare? But here I am dying of hunger. I will get up and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands.' So he set off and went to his father." Now, this young son could have gone through a cynicism spiral, and for all we know, he might have. In his effort to not be defeated, he hired himself out and was sent to go feed pigs, and that could have been a spiral that he was in then. Because that can feel pretty defeating for someone who didn't grow up in that kind of environment. Now, there are 4 parts that I want to talk about that come in breaking that cynicism cycle. And so far, we've already kind of gone through the first 2 in our series, so we're already halfway there. But the first part is conviction, when you discover that something needs to change. For the younger son, this came when he was wallowing in self-pity, realizing that he wanted to eat what the pigs were eating because he was so hungry. And then Jesus said he came to himself. That's that paradigm shift that we talked about, but it's when we're being convicted. It's when we understand that we need to change. And we talked about before, too, how that change is so difficult for so many of us. But I love this quote from psychologist Henry Cloud. He said, "We change our behavior when the pain of staying the same becomes greater than the pain of changing." So when it's harder to stay the same, when it's more painful to stay the same than it is to change, that's when we can start that transformation. So first, we're convicted, and then the second part of overcoming cynicism is being compelled. And that's when you find your inspiration to move forward. So the younger son came to himself, he realized he needed to change, and then he was compelled when he remembered how his father's hired hands ate better than he did. He started to imagine a world of being hired by his dad when he could at least have enough to eat, and that compelled him to return home. I wonder, what compels you to move forward? What is the motivation that keeps you going? Sometimes that can be found in finding our why. What's your why? Why do you get out of bed in the morning? Why do you go through the routine that you do? Why do you come to church? Why do you follow Jesus? The answer to that question can help you find a deeper purpose, and it gives you a starting place then to move forward. So that brings us to our third part, which is course. It includes creating the specific steps necessary to move forward. Once the younger son discovered that he needed to go back to his father, he made a plan. He planned out what he would tell his father when he went back, and then he hoped for the best that his father would take him seriously to hire him. Now, sometimes that's a natural flow in our lives. How many of you at the beginning said that you are more of a planner than someone who's spontaneous? Some of you said you like to have a plan. I have a magnet that says, "We plan, God laughs." So we always have to keep that in mind to be flexible. But a plan helps us in so many ways. We have our vision that compels us, and then it helps us to then set goals for the future. And that's the basics, really, of church leadership. You can't really make a real and lasting change if you don't have a plan, if you don't chart your course. But sometimes, I think all of this third and fourth step can be so overwhelming for people. So it could be easy to look at it like this. You might have a goal for what you want to have accomplished in the next year, and then you just break that down, maybe into 4 steps, so that every quarter, every 3 months, you have a plan of what you're going to do next to get you there and to keep you on track. But then that leads us to our final part, which is action. The younger son put his plans into action, right, and started to go home. And that might be the hardest of all of the steps. Sometimes our goals seem too much. The stress can be so high, and we fear what will happen on the other side. So we choke, right? Sometimes it can just be way too overwhelming. Like Ron, after 9/11, the trauma becomes too heavy. The weight that he had to carry from surviving when others didn't was just too much to bear. And so he needed help and guidance and a plan to come back from all of that. His faith and probably therapy were a big part of that for him. Sharing his story, he said, was a part of his comeback journey. All of this can seem so overwhelming. We shared about making goals and finding a plan in the study that we have on Thursday nights, where we're following along in our comeback journeys, digging a little deeper. And someone said, it is so overwhelming to make goals and to try to move a plan forward because sometimes things just seem so insurmountable, right? And so, especially when we're coming back from a fall or dealing with the weight of grief or betrayal or pain, it can be hard to know how to move forward. And so to that, I say this: what is one small step that you can take today? Maybe it's cleaning or organizing a room, because that changes a whole lot of things and can help us move to that next step and move forward. You know, here at Linglestown Life, we've been through all sorts of change in the past 5 years. The pandemic shifted us in several ways. A pastoral transition after 17 years happened just over a year ago, and that was another large change. And so at this point, as I get settled in here, in this place that I love, we've been asking the question, what is our why at Linglestown Life? Who are we now? And who is God creating us to be? And so I love the ways that we have tried just small steps along the way to discover that. Like turning a breakfast that happened once a month at Rockville and maybe once a quarter every so often here on Sunday mornings. We turned it into a evening meal, right? Once a month, dinner church, breaking bread together. That one shift brought others on board, and it has become something beautiful with hopes to expand as we find new ways to worship with those in our community. It's become something that we never imagined it to be because of that one small shift. Last year, we also decided to try trunk or treat. We tried a pie competition. That was a lot of fun. And then we've been getting out to events in our community like a 4th of July festival where we played games with kids and the Taste of Linglestown just last month, to be present in our community and to share our story with others. And all of those things, those trying things, are my favorite ways to do ministry. I love doing ministry where you throw a noodle on the wall and you see if it sticks, right? That's how you cook pasta, and that's what I love, because sometimes things will fail, and we will try again then if it doesn't stick. But if it sticks, God is showing us who God is creating us to be and helping to tell us our story. It's helping us discover who we are. The future is so bright, my friends. But here's the thing. No matter how dark our lives might seem, God gives us just enough light for whatever step we are on. And that helps us to take the next step in action for a comeback. And God's light might be hard to find in the darkness that might surround you, but it's always there, giving us just enough light for where we are so that we can take that next step. Throughout this series, we've been hearing comeback stories from people in our church family, and it has been wonderful to hear the testimony of so many others. So today, Sally Paff is going to share her testimony with us, and I invite her to come forward.
Good morning. In October of 2012, I was headed for a life-changing event. I had remarried back in 2002, only to find out over the years that I was living in a marriage with someone whom I no longer recognized. Eventually, with time, I learned there is a name for this condition, and it is called NPD, or Narcissistic Personality Disorder. A narcissist is someone who has an exaggerated sense of self, importance, and a lack of empathy for others. The term narcissism can be used casually to describe someone who is self-centered, boastful, and attention-seeking. However, NPD is a more severe mental health condition that involves a pervasive pattern of traits that include lying, cheating, belittling, rude, self-absorbed, and narcissists are extremely manipulative. The funny thing is, when I met my ex-husband RJ's family, I felt so welcomed and got along famously with his father, his stepmother, his daughter Alicia, who just happened to be transgender, and his siblings. It was during the 3rd year of marriage when I noticed a change in how I was being treated, and I began to suspect he was lying about things, and I noticed that when we would be out with others, he would exaggerate and tell stories that were totally overblown and, quite frankly, not true. I backed off. I would correct him, and he would get very angry, and so I just backed off until I could approach him about it, and somehow I was always to blame. We had traveled to Las Vegas to visit his daughter and husband, and I was embarrassed and appalled when he verbally abused me and told her that he wanted to come back and live in Las Vegas and that I was being selfish. I never indicated in our entire time together I had any interest in leaving Pennsylvania. Later that night, his daughter shared with me that he did the same thing with her mother and countless others, so there was indeed a pattern. There are times when he was actually very nice and caring, and his parents were so happy about our marriage, and his stepmother Sharon was hoping that RJ finally found someone that could bring him steadiness to his life, and they were hoping I could be the change he needed in his life. With that being said, I thought just maybe I could be the person to change his behavior and try to work with him. But as I found out down the road via therapy, that a narcissist doesn't change, rather you need to change. RJ and I even went to counseling further down the road with Pastor George. He gave us suggestions on how we could work on things, but that lasted maybe a week. I admit I was totally naive and never had any reason in my life to not trust people. But alas, I had never been exposed to a narcissist whereby they build you up and make you feel so cared for and loved, and then they do the very best to tear you down. When you confront them, they turn it around on you, indicating that you're the problem. This is gaslighting at its best. Since I had been previously divorced, I truly believed it was my fault this was happening to me, and it was God's way of punishing me. I lost so much of my self-esteem during those years of his cheating on me, lying to me, and being almost an embarrassment to me in front of my family, and I would make excuses all the time for him. I didn't want others to know about the hell I was living in. Rather, it was easier to put up a facade. But there was a moment that just ripped my heart out, and I fell into a deeper and darker place. On top of that, there were health issues with my mom, and my sister was going through a particularly rough time in her life. At this point, I felt utterly and completely overwhelmed and actually ended up having a complete nervous breakdown. Those close to me here at church, like Amy, Jeannie, Gail, and a few others, recognized there was a definite change in me. If you've ever read Harry Potter books, the creatures called Dementors were these horrible, black, flying, faceless ghosts that literally sucked all the joy out from a person. I now understand that Arthur J.K. Rowling's own depression played a huge role in her creating these creatures, because really in people's mind, what would be worse than death? I believe that would be living, but having absolutely no joy, no expression, just going through the motions of living. I related so much with Sandy Grant's testimony when she described her depression being so pervasive and deep, and you literally just want everything to end. You're so tired of feeling nothing, and the only thing that gave me respite was sleep. People would tell me to watch a funny show or get out among people, but alas, when I would turn the TV on, nothing registered. I heard the words, but I heard no reaction or feeling to what was going on. I wanted peace and felt so helpless to fight it. When October of 2012 came around, I normally would be deep into my decorating mode for fall and then Christmas, but alas, I did not put up one decoration, bake one cookie, or buy any presents, as it was just too much. I explained to my family I was not feeling well, so we wouldn't be joining them for Thanksgiving, as I stayed home and had a conversation with my husband explaining what I was going through and how hurt I was with all the constant lying. But alas, in the days that followed, nothing changed. I went over to celebrate Christmas by myself with my family and left early, explaining I was not well. Days passed, and I decided it was time to be at peace and just get the rest that I so longed for. I knew how I was going to accomplish this, and it would be a peaceful transition. However, I had to do one last important thing, and that is when I sat down at my computer and started writing my letter. Dear God, please forgive me for what I'm about to do. It was imperative that I let those closest to me know that I loved them, and I did not want them to harbor any sense of guilt, as they were the best people they could be, but I was beyond their help, and I wanted them to understand I was just so tired. So I was writing my letter, making sure I did not forget anyone: God, family, close friends, my pastor. But what about my neighbors and my coworkers, and what about my high school friends? It was daunting. What was supposed to be a goodbye letter was turning into a manuscript in my head. I did not want to miss anyone, as I feel so horrible to leave someone out. I said to myself, God, what is wrong with me? It was as if in that moment I was being directed to just stop. That was my God moment. I stopped typing, reached for the phone, and I said, Mom, you need to come get me now, and I need to stay with you for a bit. My mom raced over to get me, and I told RJ that Mom was coming to get me and I would be staying with her for a time. That was the night that God saved me, and my mom was right there by my side to help me. I stayed with my mom for about a week and took a few days off work to sort things out. I needed help, and it took months of seeing a therapist and finding the right antidepressants to help me get through those difficult months. I went ahead and made an appointment with the attorney to file for a divorce. I told Pastor George, and I remember him saying that he typically always wants couples to work things out. But in this particular case, he totally supported my decision and felt this was something that needed to take place. So I filed for divorce and let RJ know and provided him with the paperwork. He said ultimately he wanted to head back west and wanted to fly out for a job interview that he had procured and was going to stay with his daughter for a week and find a place. During this time, he continued to try and manipulate the situation. And I remember Robin Brightbill had actually come over to drop off a table for my garage sale, and she witnessed firsthand the self-absorbed attitude and rudeness he displayed. Once again, I was mortified by his behavior, but at the same time felt justified in my decision. At one point, he stated maybe we should just stay married, but I was resolute in my decision, and I knew in my heart that I had really tried for 10 years. But enough is enough, and I had to stay strong and be firm. Never mean or hateful, just firm. I treated him with the utmost respect and was incredibly fair about everything, as I didn't want to be that kind of person that becomes bitter or just plain nasty. That is not who I am. I wanted to be able to hold my head high and end things on a polite and cordial note. It is odd, but I think for the first time in his life, he realized I wasn't playing around, and there would be no moving me or manipulating me, as I would no longer be his victim. Sometimes we need to just give up our control and stop trying to make everything all right. Sometimes it is okay that it's messy and not the hallmark life that we had envisioned for ourselves. Sometimes life becomes a living hell, but surrendering our control is the greatest feeling. I was so tired, and God knew that. He's there for us when we are weary, and with God behind me, the love and support of my family, my friends, my church, and therapy, I became stronger with every passing day. I eventually could stop my antidepressants, although I still take a very small dose for anxiety. These kind of life events will make you stronger, and it puts so many things into perspective. I came out of the darkest place and found myself to be a survivor with a stronger faith for whatever lies ahead. I went through a completely different comeback story when my dear mom passed away on January 6, 2021, but that's another story for another time. I have kept my goodbye letter as a reminder of how far I've come. A positive is that I did actually meet someone, my Joe, and we've been in a long-distance relationship, but we made it work. As of today's date, we've been together over 10 years, not married, as I do not want to rush anything, but we have a remarkably good and stable relationship. As I look around this room this morning, I see so many faces that are dear to me, and I'm so thankful for the friends that I've made at my church, for they're my friends for life. I'm so blessed, as is this church, to have our very own Pastor Rachel, for she is such a light and has made such a difference to our community since day one. She's not just my pastor, but she is one of my besties, and I refer to her as my bestie in many of our talks. But let me end by saying, truly the greatest thing is my continued growth and passion for an even stronger relationship with God, as He is always there. I'm a better person, equipped with more grace and understanding. We should never judge anyone, as we don't know what they are going through, and many times we have no idea a person's pain. I've learned via my faith and through God that kindness and grace are keys for our spiritual growth. Trust in God, and remember, you are not alone.
Thank you, Sally, for sharing that story. You are one of my besties, too, and you are a light to this community, and so we're grateful that you are here with us, that you chose to stay. And it has been so amazing to hear all these stories. Sharing our stories can be so powerful, whether we have something big like that or whether we have something small, too. So I'm grateful for the ways that y'all have shared your story. I don't know what your next step is in a comeback journey, but maybe the next step can be as simple as coming to this table to remember the sacrifice that God made for all of us, for the love that God has poured out on each and every one of us. And so I invite you to find ways to sense God's presence that is in this place as we come to this table. And as we come to this table, remembering the many others around the world who are gathering in worship on this day and sharing in communion together that connects us all through the love of God. That helps us, I think, to not feel so alone either. You know, Jesus was always the guest. When he was in the homes of Peter and Jairus, in Martha and Mary and Joanna and Susanna, he was always the guest. At the meal and tables of the wealthy, where he pled the case of the poor, he was always the guest. He would upset polite company. He would befriend isolated people. He would welcome the stranger, but in all of that, he was always the guest. But here, at this table, Jesus is the host. Those who wish to serve him must first be served by him, and those who want to follow him must first be fed by him. Those who would wash his feet must first ask him to make them clean. For this is the table where God intends for us to be nourished. This is the time when Christ can make us new. So come. You're invited to come if you hunger and thirst for a deeper faith, for a fuller life, and for a better world. Jesus Christ, who has sat at our tables, now invites us to be a guest at his. And so among friends and gathered around a table, Jesus took bread and he broke it, and he said to his closest friends, "Take and eat, for this is my body which has been given for you. Do this as often as you eat it in remembrance of me." And likewise, when the supper was over, Jesus took the cup. He gave thanks and he gave it to his disciples, saying, "Drink from this, all of you, for this is my blood of the new covenant, poured out for you and for many for the forgiveness of sins. Do this as often as you drink it in remembrance of me." So Christ, whom the universe could not contain, is present with us in the breaking of this bread. Christ, who redeemed us and called us by name, now meets us in the sharing of this cup. So you're invited to come, to take this bread and this cup in this meal. God comes to us so that we may come to God. I invite you to pray with me.